You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Well, isn't that wonderful? We lost the music at the last minute, and this is Force 13 Live. We usually have opening music, but this time I guess we won't. Typhoon Hagibis is more important than that anyway. There it is on the screen on the right hand side. Latest imagery of the storm. It's still a category 3 on the Saffir-Simpson scale with winds of 120 miles per hour, our estimate, and a pressure around 930 millibars. Here's some other imagery of the storm drawing closer to Japan this hour. It's just past midnight local time, and on the universal clock it's just past 3 p.m. Still has a decently developed central core there. The eye is starting to fade away. However, it will still carry a lot of intensity as it moves over land. Look at the size of its influence for one. And then it will eventually make landfall somewhere on the southern coast in the next 24 hours. Models were suggesting that landfall would occur at about 21 hours from now. Remains to be seen whether the storm will go quicker or indeed slower than what is forecasted to that regard, to that end. Also, we have some breaking news this hour. Subtropical storm Melissa has formed in the Atlantic as well. We've got to give this a mention. New tropical cyclone, subtropical cyclone off the coast of the United States. We won't be talking about that very much though, because there are no warnings in effect. And so the main feature is Typhoon Hagibis. Now, there are lots of warnings in effect across Japan, and you'll see across all of our graphics this hour, everything scrolling by and all of the information that you need. But let me just go on with the latest information. So, storm warnings, typhoon warnings in effect for many parts of Kyushu now, mainly the eastern side, the southern coasts of Shikoku, and also parts of Honshu as well, particularly the prefectures of Mi and Aichi. Also on the left hand side you can see now the chances of tropical storm force winds in the next 5 days, along with those graphics from the JMA. Really the chances are very high in the Tokyo region for tropical storm force conditions, and I would say typhoon conditions as well. So it's going to be a very rough day on Saturday across the whole country, really, because tropical storm conditions are possible pretty much anywhere in Japan, except maybe the very far north and western areas. Now, the storm is gradually weakening. We do expect that the weakening will be much quicker later on. That's because sea surface temperatures will start to drop off a bit of a ledge as it gets close to the coast of Japan. But I think what will do more of a job in the storm's weakening will be wind shear, high wind shear. It's already on the increase today. It's going to rise even more tomorrow, or today as it is now in Japan, Saturday. So wind shear will rise steeply over the course of Saturday, and hopefully we'll see some significant weakening. Best estimates for a landfall right now, in terms of intensity, we're probably looking at somewhere around 100 miles per hour and a pressure around 945 millibars. So that is still a very powerful landfall considering the storm's size. It's enormous, around 300 nautical miles in each direction is the gale force winds, and typhoon conditions extending out about 70 miles in each direction too. It is a CDPS stage 8. Now that is, out of the 10-tiered scale, very high, catastrophic damage expected. Not only with those winds, but the main risk really now, even more than the winds, is the rainfall. Now, there's nothing imminently happening at the moment, but in the next 24 hours we could see the potential for landslides, flash flooding, inundation, and stage 8, the expected rainfall amount is about 24 inches, which is 600 millimeters. I've seen some local sources suggest that it could be higher than that indeed. So rainfall, I think, will be a massive threat for many regions here as the storm draws closer. So we're looking at that latest imagery, and let me just try and find, it will take a bit of clicking for me to get there, but the latest in terms of the storm's position and just how far it is from some populated areas. I'm just bringing that up here. If you do have any questions for me during this hour, you can send them in live whilst we're on the air to discuss the latest, and any questions I'm duty bound to answer. Start your message with Force 13 all in text and it will light up for me. So the storm's current position, we're looking at it right now. It's somewhere around 30.3 degrees north and around 136.9 or maybe 137.0 degrees east. That position puts the storm in relation to the coastline 226 miles from the closest point of Honshu, and that is at Wakayama Prefecture. It is 304 miles from Hamamatsu, 334 from Nagoya, 313 from Osaka as well, and 402 miles from Tokyo at this time. So in around 24 hours the storm will be passing through that region or less, so it's going to shift 400 miles in that time. So the storm will surely be picking up pace if it is going to get there according to that schedule. Again, you can see there chances of tropical storm force winds on the left getting near 100% along large parts of the southeastern part of Japan. Very high populations involved, which is probably why there's so much interest in this storm. I think a lot of international interest in this storm as well because of the sporting events that are going on this weekend that have had to be changed because of the storm's arrival, and it surely will arrive over the course of this weekend now. It will be clearing away by Sunday. So we've got the typhoon warnings, we've got the gale advisories, which are in effect for large parts of the islands as well, extending from Amami all the way to most of the way up Honshu towards the north. And then you can see the marine warnings there as well, the purple regions there, typhoon warnings. So large parts of the sea areas there, which are under major threat too. Alright, let's see if we've got some questions, mainly questions about what is its strength. So just to reiterate, we're currently putting the storm's intensity at 120 miles per hour. That's around 190 kilometers per hour. That's sustained winds with higher gusts. And we're putting it at a pressure of around 930 millibars, 930. The Joint Typhoon Warning Center will be going with 130 miles per hour at their update and a pressure of 926, which I think is quite remarkable. And the JMA, of course, the Japan Meteorological Agency, they're currently going with a pressure of 935 and maximum sustained winds of 90 knots near the center. That translates to pretty much what we're saying, 120 miles per hour, 1 minute sustained. The JMA expect that the storm will make landfall again with a pressure around 945 millibars, which is what our calculations came up with as well. And they're expecting wind speeds actually maybe in category 3 still by the time it gets there. So that's an interesting development. I think that's the JMA there saying that the storm will make landfall as a category 3 pretty much, which is certainly more than what we were expecting. However, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center going with quite a bit less. They're calling for a landfall. Now we've got to do some interpolation on this because they put their they put the forecast dots at 24-hour intervals, and at 24 hours it's already made landfall. So 80 knots by then, which is 90 miles per hour, but it probably would be a little bit stronger before making that landfall. So I'd suggest there we're still on course for 100 mile an hour landfall according to the JTWC. So we're looking, therefore, pretty much assured that this storm will make landfall as a Category 2, a worst case, possibly a Category 3. Bear in mind that in the month of October, there have only been, I think, 2 typhoons that have made landfall in Japan as a Category 3. And one of those was on the Ryukyu Islands, much further south. This one is enormous. I think the only other one, I think I'm right in saying it was Maon in 2004, which we've already compared to another storm this year, which struck the same area, Faxai, of course. This storm is much bigger than Faxai. If you're looking to compare the storm to that, it is enormous compared to Faxai. It is more dangerous than that. It is obviously larger, it has got a bigger wind field, there's going to be more widespread gales, there's going to be higher rainfall totals, and quite possibly there's going to be higher sustained winds for longer and inland as well, because this storm won't weaken as quickly as Faxai did because of its larger size. So that is something to bear in mind as well, especially if you're watching us from inland locations. There could still be easily typhoon conditions, and we saw with the tropical storm force wind conditions we're still at 90 something percent well inland, almost indeed to the other side of the peninsula, the northwestern regions there. So that's something else to bear into mind there as we continue to watch this storm. I'm here for the hour. After that we'll probably run with some automated streaming for a few hours so we can just watch the storm in real time through the overnight hours, and then later on this evening I'll be joined by my team. So let's see if we've got any more questions that are coming in at this point. Would we say that Typhoon Hagibis' pressure is low for its strength, or is this a normal thing for rapidly weakening cyclones? Well, the storm's size has certainly helped it to be really intense in terms of its pressure. Yes, it is lower than the anticipated wind pressure relationship. The typical wind pressure relationship for a 120 mile an hour storm is around 938, roughly 938 millibars. It's getting closer to that wind pressure relationship normal than it did, say, when it was doing its secondary peak, which we put as 175 miles per hour and a pressure of 895. That was a few days ago. Probably a more intense pressure peak than its first peak, as a matter of fact. But I think that one might be up for debate. So yes, the pressure is a little bit lower than what you would expect for a storm like this, mainly due to its size, but also in part due to its history. So you're partly right there. Alright, we don't have any other questions at this point. So we are back with the storm. Let's see if we've got any more imagery that we can show. I've been trying to get the geocolor working properly, but it seems to be a bit glitchy there, so I'm not sure what's really going on with that. So we're left with the RGB air mass imagery, which does quite well show the eye itself. If you saw the last update that we produced last night, which I think would have been the 3 Zulu update, so that was about 12 p.m. today, or Friday, Japan time. We saw that the eye was weakening, the eye wall, the cloud tops were getting much worse, and the eye could have been on the brink of collapse. Now, the eye is still there, and I guess it's still on the brink of collapse, because what it's doing right now, the eye is shrinking quite a lot at the moment. It's almost gone on those latest frames. So we could still see that eye disappear very soon, and that would probably instigate more rapid weakening. As long as that eye is still there, it will hold a lot of that intensity still. The cloud tops have responded to this eye shrinking by blowing up a little bit more, and they'll continue to do that as the eye disappears for a little while. And then probably in about 12 hours, the cloud tops will start to die off a little bit, and the storm will probably begin some extratropical transition. Bearing in mind, this is quite late in the season for a ferocious typhoon like this to strike central Japan. Usually this tends to happen in the month of September, sometimes August, and then you get the odd few, just a couple in October. But this is a very strong one for the time of year, and I think that would mean that post-tropical transition will happen more quickly, and the acceleration will probably be more quick as well. So a question there, they say, is off topic. It's not fully off topic. We do mention it every so often. Our estimates for subtropical storm Melissa. I don't think there's any reason not to go with the National Hurricane Center. It's clearly patently a tropical storm, subtropical. I keep making that mistake. A subtropical storm, not fully tropical, not extratropical either. So I don't think there's much to say about Melissa, even though it has just formed in the Atlantic off the eastern seaboard of the United States. No warnings are in effect over there in relation to the storm. Tropical related warnings, that would be, but there are, I think, storm warnings off the coast, non-tropical, and maybe some wind related warnings in part of the US, definitely in Nova Scotia and up towards Newfoundland. But the main feature we're covering tonight, as it is local time, is Typhoon Hagibis. The time in Japan is 16 minutes past 12 on Saturday morning. The current time on the US East Coast is 11:16. So Typhoon Hagibis still has winds of 120 miles per hour on our estimates. Other estimates differ. JMA agrees with us on that. The JTWC going higher, 130 miles per hour. Landfall, according to the JTWC, is expected probably at around, let's see here, around, trying to figure this one out, slowly but surely. Nope, I've all gone to mush here. About 6 p.m. There we go. About 6 p.m. Japan time tomorrow, or today as it is now, again, Saturday. That's according to the JTWC. The JMA, let me just quickly have a look here. I've not looked at the exact time expectations for landfall. They're probably saying around the same, actually. 6 or 7 p.m. Japan time is when the landfall would be expected in the southeast. Now, don't forget that the landfall is more symbolic than anything. Major storm conditions will be felt a long time before the passage of the eye, if it's still got one left by the time it gets there. Just to put it into perspective right now, tropical storm conditions are just about occurring along the coast already, at least according to our computations. I'm not sure about actual observations just yet, but tropical storm force conditions are likely occurring or imminent along large parts of the south coast of Japan, from anywhere from Shikoku all the way up to Tokyo. Imminent tropical storm force conditions. That's winds of 40 miles per hour or higher. That's about 65 kilometers per hour, and they will gradually increase throughout the early hours, and by the time we get to the morning daylight hours, typhoon conditions will be possible along some parts of the coast. If it shifts further towards the west, you could be looking at places like Hamamatsu, Shizuoka, potentially getting typhoon conditions. That's quite likely with the size of the wind field, particularly in Shizuoka, by the time we get to the morning. Shimoda is the potential landfall zone, sticks out like a sore thumb. And then further east you've got places like Tateyama, another very exposed location which will probably get typhoon conditions, most likely. Yokohama, Tokyo will probably get typhoon conditions. There's no two ways about it. We will probably see sustained winds above 120 kilometers per hour for those very, very extensive large populations in the Tokyo region. And typhoon conditions will probably continue as the storm moves further towards the northeast tomorrow night as well. And it will probably leave the coast. Not sure exactly where it will exit, but somewhere along the coast there, towards the northeast. Just trying to get my bearings. Probably just south of Iwaki. tomorrow night. Also got to point out, on the middle pane there, you can see another system that could develop into a tropical cyclone very soon in the eastern Pacific. That's got a high chance of development from the National Hurricane Center. 70% in the next 48 hours, 90% in 5 days. There is also an interesting looking system in the central Pacific, but it hasn't yet been tagged by the CPHC. Apart from that, we do have that other Invest in the Western Pacific, Invest 95W. People have been watching that one closely as well. That one could become our next typhoon. All indications are showing that that one will probably not affect land. If that changes, of course, we will be here. Okay, let's see what other questions we have. How much flash flooding is expected for central Japan? Well, you'll have to forgive me for not being completely familiar with the local regions, but I assume the mountain areas, I know there's a lot of mountains in the central part of Japan, they will get huge amounts of rainfall. We could be looking in excess of 24 inches, that's 600 millimeters, so obviously that rain will all fall down to the low-lying areas eventually. Rivers and streams will most likely overflow in some areas. We could see landslides, and so anywhere that is a flood-prone area that has received flooding from typhoons in the past, it is pretty likely that that will happen again this time, because it is a very wet storm, more than most, probably not more than all, but I think the rainfall threat is severe. It is the most, I would say, the most severe part of the storm, particularly inland. Alright, just fiddling about with some buttons here whilst we continue to look at that imagery. Here's a look at this one again, the geocolor imagery. Just trying to speed this up a little bit. So this is pretty much real-time imagery from the Himawari rapid scan, roughly every 2.5 minutes. And that's how the storm's been progressing. Let me just check the timestamp on those frames. Yep, pretty recent. The last, well, sort of, around half an hour ago. And you can see there the northern side. I mean, the convective cloud tops aren't particularly impressive when you compare it to other storms. So it's really the size of the storm that is going to be a massive thing on this. But you can see more bands about to move in that are going to strike in the next few hours. The main core of the storm is still well offshore. That core there, you can quite easily make that out. That's where all the typhoon conditions will be. You can just about see it getting beyond that next line of latitude. I'm not sure what line that is, probably 36 north. Not 36, 32. Yeah, that probably 32 there. And eventually that will reach the coast as well. Alright, more questions. Well, there's actually a statement there saying Lorenzo was a Category 5. Well, that's up to interpretation. And another question there, are there any good apps for tracking tropical cyclones and depressions? Well, I wouldn't want to favour any in particular. I'd just do a search. There's loads out there that track tropical cyclones. We ought to make one, to be quite honest, but I'm personally not clever enough to do that. We'll stick with the live coverage. There's another. I've just missed that statement. Okay, let's see. Could we show rainfall estimates for Typhoon Hagibis? Alright, well, I can't show them on the screen, but I can tell you what we're expecting in terms of rainfall according to some of the models. They all often say different things, but it's pretty assured that the central regions of Japan, west of the landfall point, will get the most amount of rain. That is pretty clear. And we could see maximums well above the 24 inches in some mountain regions. As a general rule, we're probably looking, say in the Tokyo region, we could be looking at 4 to 8 inches of rain. That is up to about, trying to work that one out in millimeters, about 200 millimeters of rain possible in the Tokyo area. Maybe a little more in some regions, but west of the landfall zone is the most likely place for the highest amount of rain. Now, at the landfall point, so you're looking at places like just west of there, like Hamamatsu and Shizuoka, we could again be looking at over 200 millimeters of rain there. What's more is that the rainfall trail will extend all the way up the east coast of Japan as it gets towards the northern part of Honshu. You could still be looking as far as Sendai and further. You could be looking still at 200 millimeters of rain or greater. I would say that the rainfall threat ends west of maybe Nagoya, but definitely west of Kyoto and Osaka is probably where the rainfall threat won't be particularly great. So really, drawing on anywhere from Osaka all the way up towards the north, along the east coast, up to Sendai, a little bit further than that, you're looking at over 200 millimeters of rain as a possibility, and the central regions well above 600 millimeters. All right. We had a few more questions there as well. What should we expect from Melissa? Well, it's interesting to note from the National Hurricane Center forecast, which isn't on the screen, unfortunately, but I can tell you that the forecast, the update, shows that the wind field of the subtropical storm is sort of over the U.S. East Coast. So it's interesting that they haven't issued any tropical storm warnings or anything like that. There are gale force conditions occurring over parts of Long Island, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and southeastern Massachusetts, Cape Cod, Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard. So large amounts of tropical storm force winds occurring there, which will move away eventually, pretty soon I should think. It will be just a spin-up cyclone, really, Melissa. They expect it to be gone by late Saturday. Just looking up some more questions here. There is one at this point. What is expected for the invest in the Eastern Pacific? I haven't actually been looking at that one closely. It's clearly expected to become a tropical cyclone as it progresses in a general north-northwesterly direction. Looking at latest models, let's have a quick look here as soon as I can get it running. So we're probably looking at a tropical storm at least there, just running through the imagery. Maybe an outside chance of a brief hurricane. But it's going to be one of those storms that you see in late season that just spin up and die before they manage to get to the Baja California Peninsula over there in Mexico. So if you've just joined us, this is Force 13 Live, an update on Typhoon Hagibis, which continues to move towards Japan. We feel necessary to provide you with a whole hour of live commentary on the storm at this point, even though it is at a very late hour over in Japan. It's just coming up to midnight. We're probably going to wrap things up at the end of this hour and we'll come back in the morning, but it was definitely necessary to bring up this update. The current storm movement, I think, is just ever so slightly west of north, and the eye, it's still there, barely. We anticipate that the collapse of the eye could happen at any time. Well, we'll wait and see what happens as we continue to watch the imagery. That's all anyone can really do. Let me just remind you of what warnings are currently in effect. We've actually got breaking news regarding that. The typhoon warning has now been extended to cover Shizuoka Prefecture as well. No real surprise in that. There's the latest map at the bottom. The yellow zones are gale advisories. The red zones are storm warnings, which may as well be typhoon warnings, really, especially further east. And along the western areas there, the storm warnings out over the eastern part of Kyushu even as well. So certainly not taking this lightly, and tropical storm conditions are likely there. Gale advisories also still in the Amami Islands and extending as far north as Akita. Alright. Do we have any info on what kind of wind and rain in Suzuka, mainly the Formula 1 race circuit? I wonder why you're asking that question. Also, what would it be like on Sunday when the race starts? Well, yep, obviously a lot of interest around the sporting events this weekend. The Rugby World Cup has been thrown into disarray. The Formula 1 race in Japan also scheduled for Sunday. The storm will be leaving the area by then. I'm not convinced that conditions will be very good. I hope we don't see a repeat of what happened in 2014 during one of the other typhoons where an incident occurred in that race. But, well, we'll just have to see. I'm sure they'll be playing it by ear. I've not heard any news about whether the status of the race, but the storm will be moving away by that point, and depending on timings, if the storm does accelerate quicker, then conditions should be getting better by then, by the time we get to Sunday. And considering it is further south as well, they might just get away with it for Sunday. I don't want to throw in unnecessary optimism there, but that region further towards the west, well, the worst conditions there will be over the course of Saturday. So, well, we'll see. We'll see about that. I couldn't comment any further. Let's see what other comments we have, if there are any. You can tag Force 13, start your message with Force 13 in the chat section. It will light up for me, and I can pick out any comments that are addressed straight to our stream. So if you've just joined us, the storm currently has winds around 120 miles per hour. That's about 190 kilometers per hour. That's sustained winds. Latest imagery shows that the eye is still alive. It hasn't capitulated just yet, and whilst that remains the case, this storm will not be weakening quickly. Weakening is slow at the moment. Estimated central pressure around 930 millibars. Its current position 30.4 degrees north, 136.9 degrees east. That position estimate puts the storm in relation to some areas of land 222 miles from the closest point of land, 308 miles from Osaka, 249 from Tanabe. Suzuka in question there, 310 miles away from there. Nagoya, 329. Hamamatsu, 302 miles. And it is now 399 miles from Tokyo. So whilst we've been on the air, the storm has shifted at least a couple of miles. About 3 or 4 miles in the last half hour. Gale advisories and typhoon warnings are in effect ahead of this storm. Tropical storm conditions are most likely starting to occur along the southern coasts now. Rainfall will probably be the biggest threat, as if the wind wasn't enough, because the wind is still a massive threat, but the rainfall will probably be an even bigger threat over parts of central Japan, where rainfall totals could exceed 24 inches, which is 600 millimeters of rain, and large parts, extensive areas of the peninsula from Osaka all the way to Sendai could see rainfall amounts of 8 inches or higher, which is 200 millimeters. Same too for Tokyo, no exception there. On left hand side you can see that latest graphic showing where the tropical storm force winds and the typhoon force winds likely are right now. Typhoon force winds not affecting any land areas at the moment. We expect it to weaken more drastically on Saturday up until the landfall for 2 reasons. Sea surface temperatures will be lower, dropping below the 26 degree threshold typically required for tropical cyclone development. And also, the wind shear will be really rising, taking a very steep rise during the course of Saturday. It already is rising quite a bit at the moment, but it will really do a number on the storm, we think, over the course of the daylight hours of Saturday. So the storm could be rapidly weakening by the time it makes landfall. Normally that would be we'd sort of stand down our guard a little bit if that was the case, if it was as small as Faxai maybe. But it isn't. It's a huge storm. Gale force winds will be occurring all around the islands, really. So if it weakens quickly, it won't make a huge difference to many of us on the islands, because most of the damage will be occurring within that widespread typhoon wind field and possibly even the tropical storm force wind field and the flooding. The central area of the landfall zone, is probably not going to be much better off than it would have been anyway, because particularly the area around Shimoda is not particularly heavily populated. That is likely to be the first landfall zone, and then it obviously will move on to that very densely populated area past Mount Fuji to the east. So that is the bit we will be really concerned about, and that is something we'll be covering probably on live coverage tomorrow. So we're really still in a state of watching and waiting at this point as we enter the early hours of the morning local time, with the main features really will be coming up during the daylight hours of Saturday, and especially as we get towards the evening and night hours of Saturday when the storm will be moving over land. At the moment, our best estimations put the landfall, we already saw the location there, but the timing probably at around 7 or 8 p.m. Japan time, 6 or 7 p.m. Japan time on Saturday. Now, not all of those areas are going to experience the worst conditions from the storm at that particular time. That is something that often misleads people about, the landfall is the worst point for everyone. No, not really. The worst conditions will be felt in places like Wakayama, extending up towards Nagoya. That will probably be earlier on Saturday, around the middle of the day, I should think. Places like Hamamatsu will probably see the worst conditions maybe 4 or 5 p.m. And then you move further on towards Tokyo. Worst conditions there will probably be at around, let's see here, trying to figure this one out, probably around 9 p.m. Japan time as well. And then as it extends up towards the northeast, it will exit the coast not much later, really, probably about midnight, 1 a.m. Sunday morning. It will exit the coast and move towards the northeast. You also saw those floater images then as well. I just wonder if we could get those back for a minute, which will show you a 6-hour evolution of the storm. There they are. You can see how the eye has been shriveling up really in those latest frames. It is still hanging on in those most recent images, but it is about to lose itself, I think. And something else that you can also note on this imagery is there is a massive dry slot on the southern side of the storm. So in terms of rainfall, once the center of the storm has passed you, fingers crossed, hopefully things will get much better pretty quickly after the center of the storm has passed your vicinity. Massive dry slot down there. Most of the wetness is occurring towards the north of the storm, so really the rainfall event is probably already beginning. I do keep checking the JMA because they do real-time flood risk maps, which I think is pretty interesting. The speed at which the JMA update is pretty cool, actually. Certainly don't get that kind of thing where we are at our HQ, but there we are. They don't have any particular specific warnings posted for landslides or flooding just yet, so I'll keep checking that and see if anything comes of it. But at the moment, we're not looking at anything along those lines just yet. I'm here for another 20 minutes to take your questions live on the air. We do have a few that have come in now. Alright, just trying to catch up with everything that's been posted. There's been quite a bit. Sorry if I've missed you. Please try again. How strong will the storm surge be? Well, that is an unknown quantity with this storm. I imagine that the storm surge will be quite significant, probably on the order of at least 10 feet, probably higher than that, I should think, given that this was a Category 5 storm, has weakened a lot, but it will still possibly carry a Category 4 or 5 storm surge. So we could be looking well in excess of 10 feet, maybe 15 to 20 along the coastal regions. Storm surge isn't as much of an issue for Japan as it is for other countries because of how the coastline is, on how the mountains start very quickly, the hills. So it's not completely flat really in these areas. So that you rarely hear about storm surge being the biggest problem in a Japanese landfall. Usually it's strong winds or rainfall, which leads to flooding and lots of landslides. Let's see here, moving on. Any tips that we can share when tracking storms? That's a very general question that I've received. I don't know where we could begin when it comes. Please be more specific. I'll see if I can answer that question in any way. Why is Sepat white on the typhoon list? Well, yeah, that's another interesting one that we were monitoring early this year. Well, Sepat really had the characteristics of a non-tropical low, if I remember rightly. Another disagreement that we had this year was, I think, 7W, which we had as a tropical cyclone, and no one else did. I can't remember. That is ancient history. We've had so much happen this year since then, but that is something we'll obviously be reviewing very closely at the end of the season. How late will we give an update after landfall on Saturday? Well, okay, just to give you an idea of what our schedule is going to be. So this live update will be finishing up at the end of the hour because we have to do some other things here backstage. But the overnight hours will be pretty quiet over here. We'll be producing more updates about. We'll definitely be doing something at 6 a.m. Japan time. That is our usual update window. It's either going to be a recorded update, as we've been doing the whole time for this storm so far, or we might be going back live on the air again at that time. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but we will be providing updates on the Force 13 channel. So we'll definitely not be abandoning anyone with that, and we'll be producing more updates throughout the day and probably live coverage during the day on Saturday. So we'll certainly be here, that's for sure. Some people say the National Hurricane Center was bored. I'm not so sure about that. It was definitely a subtropical storm, Melissa. I'm always skeptical when they go and name storms, but no, it absolutely is a subtropical storm. 65-mile-an-hour winds. All right, another comment there, which is interesting. You didn't tag me, but I do want to read this out. 25 years in Japan, rain has constantly proved to be the bigger problem over wind speeds. The JMA suggests up to 1,000 millimeters of rain. So that is, yeah, I mean, isolated amounts. The models are saying different things. You're seeing anywhere from around 600 millimeters. Some very bullish models are saying up to 39 inches of rainfall. I can't even computate what that is in millimeters. That's a staggering amount if that was to transpire. I doubt it. I'm just in the middle of trying to figure out how much millimeters that is. 39 inches, that is a hell of a lot in any case. Nearly 1,000, okay. So, well, okay, so that is in line with the JMA in that case. That was the HWRF model going with that amount of rainfall. Well, we'll see. The JMA must know more than the models because of their very long-standing experience. So, potentially 1,000 millimeters of rain. That is a staggering amount. That will induce catastrophic flash flooding, landslides, and inundation in those areas that usually get impacted heavily. Where is the satellite imagery? So this is the Himawari 8 imagery from RAM on the right hand side of our picture. That's the latest rapid scan. Looks much better during the day on visible, admittedly. But because we don't have the visible imagery, it is nighttime, of course. We've got the infrared. We've also got this imagery as well, which I'm just going to update there. We'll come back to that in just a moment with the latest imagery on that view. Is Typhoon Hagibis showing any post-tropical features? I don't think quite yet. It will probably start to occur around 12 to 24 hours. We'll see some transitioning. It will still be fully tropical when it makes landfall in Japan, and it will probably turn post-tropical shortly after exiting the coast. Can Melissa become as weird as Hurricane Alex of 2016? A very odd question. The answer to that is definitely no. Alex moved through the Azores as a Category 1 hurricane in January. Melissa is nothing like that. It's off the coast of the US. Do we think the system off the east coast of the United States was impressive enough to have gotten the name Subtropical Storm Melissa? Yes, definitely. We're getting a lot of questions regarding Melissa. I know it's not lit up on the left-hand panel. We haven't got around to just updating that yet, but it definitely is a subtropical storm. So we have two systems on the radar right now. I can assure you that Hagibis is by far the more important system, and 99% of our coverage will be going on that at this moment in time. I'll just go about updating that left-hand bar there. Please send in more of your questions for the last 15 minutes here of our discussion. Hopefully I can be of use. There's Melissa, it's lit up now on the left hand side. Hopefully that pleases everyone. Alright, let's see. Okay, Storm Trackers AU has expanded on his question about any tips we can share when tracking storms. You know, that it's a very general question. There's so many things we can talk about when tracking storms. What can we say about this storm right now? I can tell you the main factors are, as long as that eye is there, weakening will be slow. When the eye capitulates, which could be very, very soon now, more quick weakening will be most likely induced because it will just, because the sea surface temperatures are dropping away, the fuel that the storm needs to sustain itself. The wind shear will be rising rapidly. That will blow away the storm's high cloud tops once it loses its structure. But he expanded upon the question, where the best data is from, the most understandable models and the most interactive maps are. Well, the HWRF has done extremely well on this storm so far, I gotta say. Ever since it was reaching its second peak, the HWRF has nailed the storm's structure all the way through nearly. I think it called for the capitulation of the eye to happen a little bit sooner than now, but the HWRF has been very good. Look it up, you'll find some sources from NOAA showing the HWRF model runs. There's also many others out there as well. The GFS is pretty solid, ECMWF. I mean, the models are becoming less relevant now as we get closer and closer to landfall. It's models are there to forecast things. We're here to forecast things, but there is a point where forecast becomes observations and live news coverage, which is what we'll probably be running into very soon indeed. And how do we make animations? Well, we could spend all night talking about how the animations are made as well. 7 years of work and knowledge have gone into creating the animations and the interface that you see on the screen tonight. Alright, just a clarification there. Someone pointing out that the JMA website shows that it will reach Tokyo at 12 p.m. on Saturday. Yes, because that is Universal Time. That's UTC. That's not Japan local time. To get from Universal Time to Japan time, I think you add on 9 hours. So that's 9 p.m. for Tokyo. A lot of people asking questions about the status of our storms on the left-hand bars. Those are all according to our analysis, which do get reviewed at the end of the year before we make our season animations, where we make a compilation of all the storms that happened in that year in all of the basins around the world. So they do get reviewed again, and we'll see what they are at the end of the year. More question. Another question just come in there. Are there some interesting developments in the Caribbean? Yes, there is an area of interest down there right now, or at least there was. The National Hurricane Center have a 20% chance of a system developing near the Caribbean. Models have been suggesting that it will form east of Nicaragua and then move towards the west-northwest, probably over a lot of land areas: Honduras, Belize, Guatemala, Mexico, and so it probably won't gain that much strength as it does so. Of course, if it does move further out to sea, we're only talking about a hypothetical system at this time, but if it does move further out over the Caribbean Sea, then it will obviously have much more chance for intensification, because it's got untapped waters, massive heat content in those waters in the Caribbean, and it could really blow up. That's something to watch out for later on the other side of this weekend, really. Any more questions to send in? We've got a few more minutes to run on here before we wrap up, and we'll just take a break and just continue to observe what's going on throughout the night over in Japan, and we'll be back with more coverage and updates starting at the very latest, beginning at 6 a.m. Japan time. So make a note of that on the Force 13 channel. We'll have another update out then. Okay, we've just had some responses there. A lot of thanks being given. Thank you for helping us along on our long journey. We've been covering tropical cyclones since 2011, when Force 13 first launched. Our first storm updates began in 2012. A question there. I mean, in this very severe situation, I don't want to bang on too much about us, but the question has come in about what was our initial motivation for the channel. I guess it was just an interest at the time. It actually was never expected to be anything like what it is today, I suppose. It was more of an experiment than anything, to see whether animating storms would work, and I guess it has. How much damage can this hurricane do? Well, first of all, just a slight correction there. They are called typhoons in this part of the world. But I do fear that this storm has the potential to cause significant, severe damage, widespread damage at any rate, just due to its enormous size. Again, 300 nautical miles is the wind field in pretty much all quadrants. The eastern wind field will be larger than the western one. Typhoon conditions will be felt along large parts of the coast, 70 miles in each direction. So, we could be looking at a very damaging storm in terms of monetary damage. Comment there, we're in Shizuoka now and the wind is quite strong. We've double checked where the emergency exits are in our hotel, and many of the shops around us have taped up their windows to prevent breaking. Very wise moves in those establishments. Definitely a wise idea to find out where those emergency exits are and to take all the precautions necessary. Definitely, if your building feels at all not sturdy, definitely don't be on the higher floors. If you're anywhere near where the landfall zone might be, then definitely get down to lower levels at the very least, because there could be potential damage further up, although a lot of these high buildings are built for very strong winds. But certainly if you feel like you're in danger, definitely evacuate the premises. Let's see what else we have here. Yep, a lot of people are going to sleep at this point. I'd certainly get that. It's probably a wise thing to do, because tomorrow in Japan is going to be a very long day indeed during the course of Saturday. Catch your sleep now whilst you can, really. Tropical storm force winds will be encroaching along the south coast very soon indeed, and they're not going to relent for some time. It will increase to typhoon conditions near the landfall zone during the late morning hours, most likely, or early afternoon hours. And then the main core will be arriving late afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. So it's going to be a long day tomorrow. Hopefully, just because it would be less dangerous, the storm would speed up a bit and strike during the day when people can actually see what's going on and see where they need to go if they have to move anywhere. Nighttime landfalls seem to be quite common in these cyclones for some reason. It probably will be nightfall by the time it does get to Tokyo, however. And obviously if the storm did move more quickly as well, that would also mean that the effects would be slightly less, particularly with that rainfall. The more time it spends over Japan, even by an extra hour or two, then the higher the flooding risk. So that is something we're looking out for. To recap, this storm has winds of 120 miles per hour, according to our latest estimates. That's around 190 kilometers per hour. That's sustained winds with higher gusts. An estimated central pressure of 930 millibars. Landfall is expected tomorrow evening, Saturday evening, tonight as it is now in Japan, at about 7 or 8 p.m. local time. If it speeds up, it could be a little bit sooner than that. So keep watching very closely to our updates. Our next update will be at 6 a.m. first thing in the morning, Japan time. The rainfall threat is huge. Anywhere from 24 to 40 inches of rain are possible. Isolated maximums of 40, that is. So that's up to 1,000 millimeters of rain, quite possible in some parts of Japan. So that is something to watch out for very closely, especially if you're in the central region. It could be a very dangerous storm indeed for that. I'm not sure what the last storm to deliver that amount of rain would have been, but certainly the threat is very high for flooding, landslides, and inundation over parts of the central part and eastern part of Japan. My name is Nathan Foy. I was here with you for this hour of coverage. We're going to be wrapping up in just a moment, just to see if we got any quick questions here. People asking about the 2005 Atlantic hurricane season animation version 5. I don't think that's going to be coming anytime soon. Certainly not relevant to what we're looking at right now. But certainly we're going to continue to watch this storm very closely. The main threat, as people have been pointing out in the chat, is probably going to be the rainfall, but certainly be very vigilant of those very widespread tropical storm and typhoon conditions. That's something to be very aware of. Don't do anything silly, I guess, is the main advice. Take all the preparations necessary. This could still be with winds of 100 miles per hour or greater by the time it arrives. That's me signing off for now. We'll be back again with another update on the channel here on Force 13 at around 6 a.m. local time. See you then.